we look back at the exam structure, we've got 10 compulsory short answer questions. The types of questions you're going to get from that could be things like list 5 methods of energy expenditure, or you might be given an abbreviation like BMR and be asked what is BMR, so you need to say basal metabolic rate, and what factors can influence BMR. So they're things like body mass, gender, age, factors like that. So these short answer questions are very much listing things. So it's list 5 methods of assessing energy expenditure, list 5 limitations in assessing energy dietary intake using food diaries. So they're short answer questions, you either know them or you don't. So for your revision for this, make sure you've got a reasonable general knowledge of the entire topics we covered on the course. You won't get a long question or a case study on a particular micronutrient, so a vitamin or a mineral, but very often you get them in the short answer questions. You get a question about what does DRI stand for, what does TUL stand for in the short answers. Often it's some of the main ones like calcium and iron. So what's the difference between heme iron and non-heme iron is a previous question. So that's a demonstration of how you do the calculations, going from percentages into grams. If you want to give it in grams per kilo, it's really simple. Just divide the amount of carbs, fats, or proteins by the individual's body mass. So if they weigh 80 kilos and they consume 100 grams of protein, it's simply 100 divided by 80, which is 1.25 grams per kilogram, which is just within the recommended limits of 1.2 to sort of 1.6 grams per kilo. Other type of short answer questions, you always get questions on supplements, dietary supplements in sport. So you either get it as a long essay question or you get it as a couple of short answer questions. So you might get asked like, how does caffeine or how does sodium bicarbonate improve performance in exercise? And you have to know the mechanisms. It's good if you know things like the doses as well. How much caffeine do you need? When do you take it? That type of thing. And also in these, it's useful to know what are the side effects of excessive caffeine intake or excessive bicarbonate. So these are very much lists. If you get a question on vitamins and minerals, this is where you're going to see the short answer questions. And it could be as simple as list 4 fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. That's 4 out of 5. Which ones produce as a consequence of sunlight? Vitamin D, 5 out of 5. So it's a real opportunity to get full marks in a section. The essay questions tend to be on large topics. So there's very frequently a question on either pre, during, or post exercise. What's the appropriate nutrition during exercise, before exercise, and after exercise? So when you're doing your revision, think general questions like those. Other general ones are, for instance, do athletes need protein supplements? So they're very broad topics where we're expecting you to talk about the physiology and the practical elements as well. If we look at long questions, an example I've already mentioned could be pick 2 dietary supplements, describe how they work, and any side effects. If you only write 1, you can only get half marks in that section. You need to write 2. If you write it on steroids, it's not a dietary supplement, you get 0 for that section, I'm afraid. So pick 2 supplements, could be caffeine, creatine, bicarbonate, beetroot juice even. Describe how they work, what are the side effects associated with their use. Final section is case studies, 3 case studies. 2 are based on numbers, which are built like this. 1, it doesn't have any numbers involved in it, so it's more general. If you do the case studies, a really good revision is some of the notes. I've put a few case studies in week 12 at Sunspace. Practice them. One of the exam questions, if I remember, is very similar to one of the case studies. So any revision you do, practice you do in the case studies will help you when it comes to the exam. So this is an example you're given here. You're given a scenario, an athlete trying to lose weight, gain weight, an athlete trying to improve performance. You're given their dietary intake, similar to what you did for your project, for your group report. and you've got to make recommendations based on their current dietary intake. So 2 of the 3 questions will be based like this. So can you do the calculation just shown there backwards? Can you turn that 350 grams into percentage carbs? Might be a useful element here. So what percentage of the diet is carbs? What percentage is protein? More importantly, what percentage is fat? Since most of our recommendations for fat are based on percentages. So is that a healthy level of saturated fat? Only way to be sure is to see, is it above or below 10% of their total energy intake. So the way I do that is I get 37.4 multiplied by 9, 37.4 multiplied by 9, that'll get around 350 calories, divided by 2,703, and that'll give me a percentage of somewhere possibly 15% saturated fat, if that's the case. That's above the recommendations. So one of the things I'd recommend this athlete to do is to cut down their saturated fat. The other calculations you need to be able to do, which are really simple, but students still can't do them, I don't understand quite why. For carbs and proteins, it's based on grams per kilo, and it's a really simple calculation. This athlete weighs 68 kilos. They eat 157 grams of protein. Simple calculation, 157 divided by 68, and you get around 2.8, which is an excessive protein intake. Carbs, 356, divide that by 68, and you get somewhere around 5, maybe a little bit above 5 grams per kilo for carbs, which is a little bit below the recommendation for someone who's training 12 days a week. So looking at this case study here, main issues are probably saturated fat is a little bit too high. Protein is the major element, which is in excess. She's got about twice the recommended protein intake. So what would be advised for her to do is to drop the protein intake, drop any protein shake she's using, and increase her carbohydrate intake. Another way of answering this question as well, or part of your answer, is calculate their subject's resting metabolic rate. You'll be given the equations on Sunspace. Check that you can use the equations if you're going to do one of these case study questions here. If I put in her weight, her height, her age into this equation here, because she's a female, that'll tell me how many calories she needs to stay alive. And that gives me an idea of how active, whether she's likely to be in energy balance, if she's eating too much or eating too little. Particularly for athletes who are losing weight for sport or losing weight for health. Very frequently there are exam questions on losing weight for health or losing weight for performance, either as a long question or as an essay question, or possibly even both. So you're very much recommended as part of your revision to look up the topic of weight loss for performance and weight loss for health. What is the best way to do it? What are the implications of losing weight for health? What are the implications of losing weight rapidly to compete? So practice going through some of the case studies. If you're someone who hates all these numbers, it's not quite tough, because there is one of the case studies where it's more generic. You're given a scenario. It could be a group of athletes performing in a marathon somewhere, or it could be a group of footballers or rugby players going on a tournament away in a hot environment. What are the recommendations you would provide them before and during the tournament when they go away to play in a hot environment? Or when they go to compete in a marathon, what advice would you give an individual who's competing in a marathon in Paris in 20 degrees Celsius, moderately warm conditions? So one of the case study questions will be pretty broad. You won't need to be able to do these calculations here, but you will still need to demonstrate adequate knowledge of the topic. So do you understand how someone should prepare for a tournament away, or how someone should prepare for a marathon, or a variety of different scenarios which you can come across? So briefly to summarise for the exam, make sure you don't leave anything out, because it may result in a short answer question. And things like energy systems, that type of thing, you won't get an essay question or a long essay question in those. They tend to be short answer questions. Same with the vitamins, same with the minerals. Do you know terms like gluconeogenesis, glycolysis? What do they actually mean? Think of any abbreviations you've used, like BMR, TUL, DRV. What do they mean? What do they stand for? as part of your revision for the short answer questions. Make sure you can do the calculations, because you're going to get a calculation question exactly like this with different figures. Make sure you can do it. It's an easy way to get full marks, 5 out of 5. Essay questions, it's major topics. Revise things like weight loss for health, weight loss for sport. Revise things such as supplements in sport. Revise major issues such as what should you eat before, during, and after. You won't get asked about all of them, but you may get asked what are the recommendations during exercise, what are the recommendations after, what are the recommendations before exercise. And other broad topics like protein supplements in sport. Finally, your case studies, they're based on, 2 of them will have numbers in it, similar to the case studies we did in the lab, similar to your group report. Make sure you can do the calculations for percentage energy, for grams per kilo, and that you know the recommendations for protein, carbs and fats for an athlete. Other one you're going to get similar to this, it could be, is generic. So a scenario you'll be given, you won't be given dietary intakes or things like that. You'll just be asked to give general advice on competing, say, in a hot environment or in a prolonged exercise. Okay, so best wishes with the exam. Make sure you do adequate revision, and make sure you cover enough topics broadly to help you to answer the short answer questions.